All right, there we go. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or not good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jimena Perez Vizcasillas. I am the outreach coordinator for the Long Island Sound Study Estuary program in New York, and I work for New York Sea Grant. And I am also one of the co-chairs of our environmental justice working group. So I'm actually not the main person or people you're going to be hearing from today. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background that hopefully will help contextualize why we did this project the way we did and what where we're planning to go from here. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so if you're not familiar, we are Long Island Sound Study. Long Island Sound Study is a national estuary program. It was established in 1985, and there's 28 national estuary programs across the US. And in our case, we are a partnership between the Environmental Protection Agency and the states of New York and Connecticut, which means that we have federal and state agencies, nonprofits, academic researchers, and just generally interested groups who all work together to protect, restore, and conserve the sound. And everything we do is guided by this document called the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or the CCMP. And we're actually revising this document this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end of this presentation. But for now, this document is divided into these 4 themes that you see here. So clean waters and healthy watersheds, thriving habitats and abundant wildlife, sustainable and resilient communities, and sound science and inclusive management. One more click, please. Thank you. So the plan also has these 3 cross-cutting principles, one of which is environmental justice. And the idea behind these principles is that they are meant to be ingrained across the 4 principles and across everything we do. Now, this meant it was in everyone's minds and in whatever work they were doing. But until 2019, there really wasn't a single person or a single group that was solely dedicated to making sure that these efforts moved forward. Next slide, please. So in 2019, actually 2 people started meeting and thinking through, what were environmental justice considerations and efforts that could be done within the program to improve and to move environmental justice forwards, efforts forward in the watershed and within our program. And what started as an ad hoc work group, it was a handful of us getting together weekly and thinking through things and holding ourselves accountable. It was officialized in 2020 and made into an official work group of the Long Island Sound Study. So now we meet quarterly, and it's open to anybody who's interested. If you are interested, you can drop it, say so in the chat, or you can email me to the email listed on the slide. But basically, once we were official, especially, we began thinking through what were gaps in our program and what were opportunities to better address environmental justice in our region. And importantly, we identified concrete objectives and tasks to address those. Next slide, please. So 3 of those gaps directly relate to this project that you're going to be hearing about today. One of them was an acknowledgement that Long Island Sound Study simply didn't know, the full extent of the needs of environmental justice in underserved communities in our region. And so to address this, we, wanted to do this project, a watershed-wide environmental justice needs assessment. The second gap was that we knew there was a need to make funding opportunities more accessible to local smaller groups in the watershed and also to help improve capacity building. And after many conversations, as of last year, we have the Long Island Sound Community Impact Fund. This program is precisely a small grants program and also helps with capacity building. And part of the idea was that it would be shaped by this needs assessment, and what these workshops would look like would be shaped by the needs that we heard about through this assessment. And finally, but certainly not least important, the final gap identified was that there was a lack of representation, basically, in decision making within our program, right? A lack of underserved and minority communities in our work groups and our committees. And so a lot of steps have to happen, a lot of things have to happen to address that, and we're working on those. But one of them is simply to begin getting out there and having conversations and partnering and, begin fostering relationships with groups that have historically not been included in the conversation. And so because of that, as you'll hear shortly, it was really important for us to make sure that even though we did bring in contractors to help us with this project, make sure that we worked with them really closely so that once they stepped away, there were still people from within our program that could, that would be there for the people who we spoke with, and who we could, who could keep these conversations going and respond to the needs of of the people who we engaged with. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before I turn it over, I just wanted to shout out the project team. So like I mentioned, we worked really closely with our contractors. So we have Kate Knight from Connecticut Deep. We have Deb Abibu from Connecticut Sea Grant. We have Lily Genovese, who couldn't join us today, unfortunately, but she is from New York Sea Grant, and she works in the New York City and Westchester region. We have Shahela Begum. If you want to wave, Shahela. She is the director of the program I mentioned, the Long Island Sound Community Impact Fund. And it was great to have her. She was sharing resources throughout whenever we met with folks. And last but certainly not least, we have Amanda Center and Maddie Duda from Responsive Management. And they are who are going to lead the show today. So our contractor was Responsive Management, they are a research firm that has been specializing in attitudes and opinions about natural resources and the environment for more than 30 years. Amanda Center has worked with them for 10 of those years and has worked on a number of coastal and environmental needs assessments throughout the United States, and has assisted state agencies, federal agencies, and NGOs in their efforts to better understand the needs of the public. Madeline Duda is a social science researcher and a community engagement practitioner. Throughout 2018 through 2021, Maddie led the needs assessment for the Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Program, or DACTI program, in the San Francisco Bay Area through Proposition 1 funded Integrated Regional Water Management Program to include underrepresented communities and tribes into water-related planning processes. Since the completion of that needs assessment, Maddie has supported the development of community and tribal-led projects to address identified issues through capacity building and technical support. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to them. Thank you.
So hi, everybody. My name is Amanda, and I, with Maddie, am going to be presenting some information and findings from the Environmental Justice Needs Assessment conducted for the Long Island Sound Study, as Jimena said. And so today tonight, we're going to be going over some components of methodology, some broad findings of the needs identified by communities, some broad findings of the needs identified by community-based organizations, some recommendations based on the findings, and then finally the broad themes that emerged during the needs assessment. And with regard to the findings that we present today, it's important to understand that these findings are broad. The Long Island Sound region is large, it's densely populated, and it's incredibly diverse. And so each community has its own priorities, challenges, and needs. And although the information we're presenting today looks at the assessment through a broader lens, the overall report, which is going to be available later this month, will include a lot of information we heard from specific communities and regions. So as I mentioned, we're going to start off with methodology. And so as he also mentioned, the aim of this project was to build relationships and connections with LIST partners and community-based groups and leaders, and to find out more about the needs of disadvantaged communities and community groups, and ultimately to use these findings to inform future environmental management programming. And so all of this was done in close and constant collaboration with LIST partners, again, just to ensure that all of the relationship building conducted during this process would last long after the project was complete. So in order to fulfill these objectives, we started with an exploratory phase that included a review of research and projects done in the area. It included interviews with LIST partners and reviews of definitions, indicators, and mapping tools that help develop an understanding of the disadvantaged communities in the region. And next, we conducted in-depth interviews with community-based organizations and leaders to develop an understanding of their needs and experiences and to begin to understand the needs of disadvantaged communities. And those community-based organizations were all working directly in disadvantaged communities. That was a really important component of this work. And then based on the findings from the exploratory phase and the interviews, we worked collaboratively with LIST to develop a needs assessment survey. And note that all of the aspects of this project played a part in developing the needs assessment survey and making sure that the survey was asking the right questions to help develop an understanding of community needs. And the needs assessment survey was then administered to residents from disadvantaged communities in the Long Island Sound region throughout New York and Connecticut. And based on the findings from the previous stages of the project, we conducted some community listening sessions in several communities in the region. And those were in order to collect more feedback about specific environmental justice issues in communities. And although we didn't hold community listening sessions in every community around the Sound, as the locations of listening sessions depended on a lot of different things like capacity, the findings from the exploratory phase, available space and time, and various other components, we did collect survey data from all disadvantaged communities around the Sound. And an important aspect of this project is that each stage built on the previous stage and informed the stage that followed. So as we learned lessons, we incorporated those into the following stages. So I mentioned the project aim and giving you some details about methodology, but we're going to further explain these findings based on the 4 major goals of the needs assessment. And the first goal of the needs assessment was to develop an understanding of how overburdened communities relate to and use the Sound. And the second goal was to understand barriers to participation in LIST events, resources, and decision-making. And third, we wanted to better understand barriers to equitable and safe access to the Sound and its resources. And finally, we wanted to develop an understanding of the environmental hazards and injustices disproportionately affecting overburdened communities. So next, we're going to be going into some of the broad findings of the needs identified by community members. And the broad findings identified by community members are going to be grouped into which of those 4 major needs assessment goals the information applies to. And this first section of community identifying needs is going to show information about how overburdened communities relate to and use the Sound and its resources. Okay, so before I begin, I just want to explain how a lot of the graphs in this section are going to be laid out. And most of the graphs are going to show the results for disadvantaged groups and the results for not disadvantaged groups. And as a quick explanation of how a respondent was classified as disadvantaged, we used several pieces of data. First, we started surveys off with the question, excuse me, that asked respondents to indicate if any environmental justice indicators applied to them. And these indicators included living near a pollution source, being low income, having difficulty with transportation, being a non-English speaker, and others. And the entire list of indicators is going to be included in the needs assessment report coming later this month. But these were all based on the indicators of disadvantaged communities established in the Georgia Justice 40 initiative. So in order to be classified as disadvantaged for the survey, a respondent would have to select one or more of these indicators and have one or more demographic responses that were also indicative of disadvantaged individuals, such as reporting a low income when asked for their specific income, as opposed to self-identifying as low income or belonging to a minority group, among others. And so this first finding here shows that disadvantaged respondents indicated that they're not using the Sound as often as not disadvantaged groups, as you can see right here on the top graph. And further, we've included the breakdown of the percentage of respondents from Connecticut and percentage of respondents from New York who've used the Sound. And in some ways, this is sort of what we would expect to see. Connecticut residents using the Sound a little more often, because some of the, and this is just based on the feedback that we got during this process, some of the communities we visited in New York, such as Mount Vernon, for example, were not aware that their local waterway was actually a part of the Long Island Sound watershed. So based on that, this might be sort of what you would expect. And this next slide is highlighting the broad finding that many people do not know about the sound. Some communities are more aware of the sound than others, but as we heard in a lot of conversations, many communities are not aware of the watershed, or they're not sure where the Long Island Sound is. And we feel that some of these quotes highlight that point. One is from a resident of Long Island, where they seemed unsure where the sound was. And the final comment from a Mount Vernon community member showed that some perceptions of the sound are not always correct. So this next finding we have is that respondents indicated that they're often using the sound just to spend time in nature. And as you can see on this graph, among both groups, people are spending time on the water with friends or family, or just walking along the shoreline or exploring. A large number of disadvantaged respondents indicated that they are using the sound for fishing as well. So here, instead of asking what they use the sound for, we asked what they would most like to use the sound for. And as you can see, the answers were fairly similar. In community conversations, we heard people talk about remembering spending time at the beach, just walking on the beach as a kid, and wanting to share those experiences with following generations. And many community members indicated that they want their children and their grandchildren to enjoy the sound in nature in the same ways that they did. And note also that on the last slide and on this slide, disadvantaged respondents indicated that they're fishing more often and that they would like to use the sound for fishing at a greater rate than non-disadvantaged respondents. And one thing that we learned during this process is that people in disadvantaged communities want to participate in environmental activities and events, such as cleanups and nature walks, as you can see here. However, it was also stressed to us during a lot of conversations with community members that being engaged has to be easy, it has to be beneficial to individuals or their community, and it shouldn't provide any additional burdens. We also heard that community members want to participate in events and activities that are relevant and meaningful to their communities. Some community members do want to participate in fishing events, while some other communities don't want to participate in events that teach fishing in areas with fish advisories, for example. Some participants specifically recommended that activities and educational events should be connected to improving access issues in their communities and connecting to policy. And some suggested that events should be the start of something that participants can continue on their own. So this next finding is that disadvantaged communities have a greater need for information about the safety of waterways and specific species for fishing and shellfishing. And among those disadvantaged respondents who indicated that they're fishing in the Sound, disadvantaged respondents indicated that they're subsistence fishing at a greater rate, highlighting the importance of providing that information. And you can see this in this graph. It's circled in red. Disadvantaged respondents indicated that they're fishing for a primary source of food for themselves or their families far more often than non-disadvantaged respondents. And when you look at these numbers by state, the percentage of respondents catching fish as a primary source of food is actually fairly even. And that indicates to me that these needs exist throughout the entire region. So in combination with the fact that disadvantaged respondents indicated that they're subsistence fishing at a greater rate, we see here that they're less concerned with health as a result of consuming fish and shellfish. And this indicates a clear need for more information to ensure they're safely consuming what they're catching in the Sound. And then here we have another one of those state graphs. And when comparing these responses by state, you can see that New York respondents were less likely to be concerned about their health when eating fish and shellfish caught in the Sound. And so this next finding is that respondents indicated that they need more information about how and where to access waterways and events. And the information you see shows how people relate to the Sound, in that it shows that more information might make them feel safer and want to participate more often. But it also leads perfectly into our next section about barriers, because this information shows that a barrier to accessing the Sound and attending events might also be a lack of information overall. So this next series of slides is going to include information about barriers to participation in LIS events, resources, and decision-making. So first, we have a few quotes here as examples of the finding that many people are not familiar with LIS. We heard this in a lot of communities. who are they? What do they do? You know, we have a quote here from somebody who said, I need a map to understand how these groups work together. And next, we have the finding that demographics typically associated with disadvantaged groups were less likely to participate in activities and events. And before I go on, I want to briefly explain this graph. This is a demographic graph, and the striped bar in the middle shows the percentage of respondents overall who've participated in an activity or event. And in either direction of that bar, you see the percentage of different demographics that have been to an activity or an event. And as you can see toward the bottom of the graph, we start to see that those demographics that are often seen in disadvantaged communities are attending and participating in activities and events less often. So an important rule of thumb about statistical significance is that a change in percentage isn't seen as statistically significant until it's about 4 to 5 points from the overall rate. So here you can see that these bottom numbers are indeed statistically significant, as they are significantly lower than that overall rate of 51%. And so this may seem a bit obvious, but this next finding is important to consider when planning events or trying to engage with communities. And that's that overburdened community members have competing priorities that often prevent them from being involved in events and conversations. And this is really important because the inability to be involved does not equal a lack of interest. This quote from a New Haven listening session perfectly sums up what we heard during a lot of our conversations. And it says, we had so many people tell us they wanted to be here. We had over 50 people respond to the invitation, but if they have to work or take care of their kids, they can't come to things like this. So when respondents indicated that they'd not participated in an activity or event, they were asked to follow up about why they'd not participated. And a large majority of respondents indicated that they'd not participated because they hadn't been aware of the event or activity. And this really emphasizes two additional findings. Number one, people want to be in nature and they want to participate in activities. And number two, again, they need information in order to do those things. And the final slide in this section shows that specific services and resources would encourage greater participation in activities and events. And interestingly, stipends did not rate that high. People were interested in having food and transportation to and from events. And they're also interested in having the necessary tools and equipment they need to participate in the event. And as we've mentioned, many disadvantaged communities have competing priorities, and offering services and resources in many cases could help break through that barrier. And next, we're going to be showing information about barriers to equitable and safe access to the sound and its resources. And here again, we have a demographic graph, but this time we're showing use of the sound. And what we're showing with the striped line is the percentage of survey respondents who've used the sound, again. And in either direction of that striped line are the percentages of each of these groups who've used the sound. And again, you can see that demographics that are typically indicative of disadvantaged groups report consistently using the sound less, such as Black or African American respondents and respondents with household incomes under $40,000. And all this may seem like something that we already know, this graph is important in that it shows clear data that some people are not accessing or are not able to access the sound as much as other groups. When asked what changes would make it easier for residents in their community to access the sound, the top response was simply knowing where to go. So transportation is the #1 constraint to using the sound, according to disadvantaged respondents. And while this graph shows that similarities exist across Long Island Sound communities, because this is both states combined, it's also really important to understand that some issues are very specific to communities. So for example, in one listening session, participants spoke about the removal of benches and shelters at bus stops, which is limited use of public transit. In another location, we heard that public transit doesn't have enough hours on Saturdays, which makes weekends, when some people might have more time for recreation and their kids are out of school, more difficult. In another community, we were told that beaches closest to disadvantaged communities are more cluttered with trash and debris, and public transit is expensive if you wish to get to a clean beach. So the final slide in this section includes several quotes to illustrate the finding that lack of clean and safe outdoor spaces in which people can recreate is a major barrier for many. And the first quote touches on compounding issues in some communities, such as issues with transportation and issues with areas with trash and debris buildup. And in the second quote, the community member notes that they feel that their waterway is filled with industrial pollution, which would obviously be a major barrier for accessing that water. And next, Maddie's going to be presenting information about the environmental hazards and injustices disproportionately affecting overburdened communities. Maddie?
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm going to start by showing a series of maps. If you can go to the next slide, please, Amanda. And these maps are from the EPA's Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and they show hazards and injustices that disproportionately impact overburdened communities. And I'm also going to share some examples of the specific ways that we've heard that these different issues manifest and overlap in different communities that we spoke with around the Sound. So this map shows food deserts. We talked to people in many areas around the Sound who described concerns about lack of access to fresh food being really top of mind. And on this map, you can see that areas in Stamford and Bridgeport and New Haven, as well as Groton and New London, and areas in Long Island, including the Riverhead area, are recognized as food deserts. And residents not always having access to healthy food came up in conversations with groups in Groton that we had, specifically around the Five Corners area, as well as in Bridgeport, and came up in areas of Nassau County too, even though this environmental justice screening tool map doesn't elevate some of those latter areas. Next slide, please. And on this map, you can see that many of the areas that are considered food deserts are also low income, and that's in part due to how food deserts are described, and also begins to illustrate something that's going to be illustrated through this whole series of maps, which is how many social and environmental burdens cumulatively impact certain areas. In many interviews and community conversations, we heard about very large wealth disparities in the region. This was something that came up in a lot of conversations on Long Island, in Bridgeport, New Haven, some of those same areas. And in a lot of these interviews and community conversations, we've heard about how low-income areas often overlap with areas that are more heavily impacted by and exposed to pollution and flooding. And one of the areas we heard this in particular was in Eastern Connecticut. Next slide, please. And so many of these cumulative burdens can contribute to a low life expectancy. You can see areas in this map in the 80th and 90th percentile, the yellow and orange on this map in the South Bronx, areas in the 100th percentile in Bridgeport and New Haven, as well as Norwich and New London. In some of the conversations that we had with folks in the Bronx, we heard a lot of people talk about industrial and commercial pollution and a lack of regulation for trucks and barges, and how the proximity of roadways and industry to communities causes a lot of these air quality issues and the disproportionately high rates of asthma that are seen, especially in Black and Brown communities. Next slide, please. So this map is the environmental justice screening flood risk map, and red indicates that in areas in the 95th to 100th percentile for flood risk. And we heard repeatedly about the dangers of flooding in communities in New York and Connecticut through this process, and how flood risk disproportionately burdens already vulnerable communities. One interview in New York shared an example related to how inhabitants of illegal basement apartments in Queens were disproportionately harmed and even killed during Hurricane Ida. This participant explained that many of the residents who lived in these basement apartments, it's out of financial necessity, not being able to afford apartments that might provide better protection against storms or flooding. And many of these folks also lacked access to the internet or other forms of public information. And during Hurricane Ida, some of these residents were unaware of the potential dangers and unable to evacuate in time to escape some of those harms from the flooding. Next slide, please. This map shows hazardous waste proximity, and some of the communities that we see most impacted are some of those same communities again, New Haven and Bridgeport, Stamford, New London, Riverhead on Long Island. Also see a lot of areas in Westchester County and the Bronx, Queens, with a lot of red, yellow, and orange on this map. And also just want to note that communities not showing up on some of these maps doesn't mean that they are not necessarily impacted by these issues. I think that's a really important reason to also have many and start with many of these conversations too, to understand, we can start with this high level data, but where are these issues also manifesting, where they might not be showing up in certain grander data sets. So areas on Long Island have an industrial past, including Hempstead Harbor and Glen Cove that we heard a lot about. In Glen Cove, we heard about a number of issues and concerns associated with PFAs and freon particulates from industry. Also heard about the submarine industry in Southeast Connecticut and how a popular fishing area in Groton, Connecticut is also an industrial area. We also heard a lot about concerns related to industrial sites near waterways in Stamford. We also heard from community members about how Bridgeport was created as an industrial city and that residents saw how the area was seen as a place to put infrastructure and services that were toxic, that folks didn't want in other areas. Those included tanneries, transportation hubs, and sewage plants. Next slide, please. And this map shows wastewater discharge. We heard a lot about wastewater in Bridgeport related to the Water Pollution Control Authority, or WPCA, and how they've been dumping raw sewage into the Sound. And this has caused a lot of concern over the safety of swimming and eating fish that are caught in the area. And with this, there was also a lot of sentiment shared that it's important for everyone to better understand how interconnected the communities on the Sound are, and that raw sewage going into Sound in one area is impacting everyone. And so this presentation is an overview of some of these environmental justice concerns in a very large, very diverse region. And these are just a few of the indicators on the EPA Environmental Justice Screening Tool. And there are many more examples about how these and other burdens manifest in different communities around the Sound, but we wanted to show a few of these maps to emphasize how these issues manifest and cumulatively burden different communities in unique ways, and want to highlight how this underlines the need for communities to be included in decision-making early and often to ensure that work and priorities are in step with each area's unique needs and history. And next slide, please. So as Amanda has mentioned, it was said many times by many people over the course of this effort, how many overburdened community members have competing priorities. And it's one of the things that we heard most was that not having time is a huge, and in some cases, the biggest barrier to being able to access the Sound and take part in existing programming and resources. One person who we spoke with at the Riverhead Public Library shared, I don't have time to go to the beach because I have to work 2 jobs to afford my low-income housing, which in Long Island is almost $2,000 a month, and I don't even have time to spend with my kids. Sharing how they didn't even have time to share with their kids, so they weren't spending any of that time on the Sound. Next slide, please. In this vein, when many participants were asked, folks often prioritize needs associated with social and infrastructure priorities. Many people shared about how it can be difficult to think about or prioritize the Sound or other natural spaces when you're working multiple jobs to pay rent and feed your family, or to think about recreation access when you don't feel safe where you live. And many people we spoke with also shared about how a history of exclusion and a lack of access to safe and clean outdoor spaces has created feelings in many communities that the outdoors aren't accessible or welcoming to them. A group we spoke with in the Bronx shared that many students haven't been to the Bronx River or to the Long Island Sound despite their very close proximity, because many people don't know they're there. And also many areas are often surrounded by warehouses and industry, and parks are really scattered throughout the community, and you might have to know where they are to find them. One person that we talked with who grew up in Yonkers shared that it wasn't until she had an opportunity through a youth organization to first see a salt marsh, and emphasized how organizations in urban areas that introduce young people like her to the environment are necessary, because many don't have access to a clean, safe environment very close by to where they live. And many people we spoke with also highlighted the importance of making these explicit links between public health and other social and infrastructure issues that disproportionately impact disadvantaged communities and the environment. So like asthma rates and poor air quality, to make those connections with the environment. Next slide, please. Some people who we talked with shared about a fear for safety that some Black and Brown communities have as a result of centuries of being excluded or denied access to waterways. And some people talked about not feeling welcome or safe in outdoor spaces. And that was said to be both due to other people acting in ways that made them not feel welcome, as well as the aspects of the physical spaces themselves, such as being gated or not being kept clean. And many people we talked with expressed concern about the amount of trash and illegal dumping near waterways, as well as concern about the safety of water quality in the Sound in general, and particularly nearby where they live or access to Sound. And many folks explicitly asked us whether certain activities such as fishing or swimming were safe in the Sound, given the quality of the water, and asking for more information about it. Next slide, please. Very, very importantly, something that we heard from many people who we spoke to is that people who live in areas that are overburdened want to see action. And some communities feel like there has been and is a lot of studying, but very little funding and action going into improving their communities. And so the most important part of this work is going to be what's next, how this information is followed up on for the region as a whole and in each specific community. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to present some of the broad findings from community-based organizations. It's important to note that these organizations are working on addressing many of the issues identified within various communities we spoke with through this process and are directly connected to the community identified needs in that way. Next slide, please. One of the major barriers that was often shared was that many community-based groups are overextended. This slide includes several quotes directly from community-based organizations. One group shared with us, "I wish I could have reached out sooner, but we don't have the time or the money to do much of anything other than what we're doing." We often heard from many of the groups that we spoke with that they might have started working on one thing, but in response to needs in their communities, they've expanded their original missions. And these expanding missions and working to meet many needs within their communities with limited budget and staff has made it difficult for many of these groups to take on additional work or collaborate without funding that's sufficient for adding additional staff to support the work. Next slide, please. Many community groups being overextended connects to another barrier that many groups shared, which is that oftentimes grant partnership and other opportunity timelines are far too short to really meaningfully collaborate with, support, and ensure participation from lower capacity community-based organizations. Longer lead times for partnerships and funding opportunities are critically needed. The quotes on this side are from two particular groups, but reflect a sentiment that was widely reported, which is many groups don't have a dedicated grant writer, but rather a few staff who take on many roles. And if funding opportunity timelines are short and one staff member is out, for some that might mean needing to wait for the next cycle to apply or missing the opportunity if there isn't a next cycle. And this is, again, very connected to the previous barrier that many groups are overextended and something that we run into in this process, which is on a short timeline, some collaborations and otherwise really important work might not happen if it needs to happen on a short time frame. We heard from one community member that urgency is the enemy of trust. And we also often heard about how meaningful partnerships and community-based work don't happen on current grant timelines. Next slide, please. Overall, a really major takeaway from these conversations was that in general, there's not enough funding that goes directly to community-based groups for community-based work to address existing issues and support visioning. One community group we spoke with shared that while there are a lot of people in their community who need and many more who could benefit from their programs, they can't expand them, and in some cases have had to reduce or close programs due to lack of funding. And we also heard that often the funding that is available might not go directly to community-based organizations, but rather to a larger nonprofit group, or might be tied to a program that's not able to cover things like general operating expenses and other necessities for organizations to function. And this connects directly to a quote that was on the previous slide, which is funding is nice, but funding does not create time. Another group shared with us, it doesn't really matter how many resources we get if we can't use them. There needs to be a process in which we can go from resource to actualization. We need to establish a pipeline where we are supported while we try to actualize things. Next slide, please. So given that we heard that so many organizations are overextended and need additional funding, it often followed that the current style and oftentimes norm of reimbursement funding is highly untenable for many groups. Many groups don't have the funding to front large amounts of work or money and wait several months or even a month for reimbursement. One group shared that communities are expected to front the money and then hire an expert in federal grants management to make sure they get it back, and they can't afford to take that risk. And another asked us, why are so many grants reimbursement based? What the communities are hearing is that they or you don't trust us. We have to be partnered with a big nonprofit or somebody that they think is going to cover our costs, which doesn't happen anymore. Next slide, please. In turn, many groups express levels of distrust with government and public agencies, and this is often due to many feeling that these groups aren't taking responsibility for addressing issues, or due to some of the agency's past roles in these issues related to redlining or other discriminatory decision-making practices, or due to past broken promises and lived experiences with not being included in consequential decision-making processes. One group shared that there's a lot of hopelessness and anxiety. There have been large infrastructure changes, but those infrastructure changes are often happening in the biggest tax brackets. And communities with lower tax brackets aren't getting the attention that is causing mistrust amongst the most vulnerable communities. They just aren't getting the support that they need. And this distrust can make efforts to address some of these issues and priorities more complicated. Next slide, please. A really overall sentiment that was shared throughout this process was that many people don't feel like they are always as involved in the decision-making processes that affect them as much as they should be. And one community group expressed frustration around what community input is sought for. They shared, yes, let's get community feedback, but it's when this is sought, it's usually for good things and bad things not so much. When developers were installing 5G towers in Bridgeport, they weren't getting community input, but then we spent 3 years getting community input to build a playground. Next slide, please. So we've shared a lot of the major barriers and a lot of information that we heard from community members and organizations. And we really, most importantly, want to connect these to these existing needs that were heard to the Long Island Sound Study and actions that can be taken to address them and to support community groups who are already doing this work. So all of these recommendations we'll present are based on and connected with the needs that were identified by community members and community groups that were presented through this presentation. Next slide, please. So to start with recommendations to meet community needs, you heard earlier in this presentation about how many community members have competing priorities. And this makes it particularly important to and drives the recommendation to incentivize engagement to appeal to people with competing interests. And this can be done in many ways, including offering stipends, childcare and food, as well as transportation. You also heard that many of the needs that were prioritized through this process were related to social and infrastructure issues. And although many social and infrastructure issues may, at first glance, seemingly be outside of the purview of the Long Island Sound Study, the Long Island Sound Study can and really should encourage partnerships and collaborations with other agencies, as well as community organizations that focus on other community and infrastructure challenges, such as housing or public health, to facilitate projects that can result in co-benefits to disadvantaged communities, protecting both the environment and the people who are integral to and live within them. Next slide, please. So you also heard earlier in the presentation that many people want to spend time in nature and want to access the sounds. And the Long Island Sound region is highly diverse and many different languages are spoken. And currently, many signs and a lot of information are only available in English. And so our recommendations that we heard many times in many settings was that signs and informational materials should always be translated into multiple languages based on the area. And this could make many more people feel welcome. It's particularly important that all information be translated. Some groups shared that oftentimes they only saw negative information being translated, like to sign an area that is off limits, but not interpretive and educational signs that enrich the experience at all. Also in the vein of education and information sharing, as you heard from Amanda, many community members and community-based organizations were not familiar with the Long Island Sound Study, and some didn't know much about the Long Island Sound or where it is. And many groups and individuals we talked with asked for, and the Long Island Sound Study can provide more information through multiple means about where the sound is, where and how it can be accessed, the benefits of the Long Island Sound to communities, and about the Long Island Sound Study itself and existing programs and events. Next slide, please. As you also heard earlier in this presentation, many community members and groups expressed concerns over the safety of water in the Sound, and many asked us whether certain activities such as fishing or swimming were safe. One community group asked why fishing lessons would be taught if the fish in the Sound weren't safe to eat, if the water was polluted. And some also shared about the fear for safety that some Black and Brown communities have as a result of centuries of being excluded or denied access to waterways. And so the Long Island Sound Study and other partners can provide more information about water quality and safety through more avenues, including at access points to the Sound, as well as materials and activities that focus on the why of these activities to respectfully inform recreational use and subsistence fishing activities. And another important related recommendation is to support or develop programs that give people greater confidence in their ability to recreate safely in and around the Sound, including swimming lessons. Next slide, please. So throughout this process, we've heard so much about how important relationship building and trust are. Relationship building takes time, support, and commitment, and continuing to show up supports developing these relationships and trust. So as an overarching recommendation, it's first and foremost extremely important for the Long Island Sound Study to continue to follow up with those groups and communities who are engaged in this process, as well as new partners, and to identify avenues for further developing these relationships, building trust, and gathering continuous feedback to ensure that the Long Island Sound Study's work is in step with community priorities. One specific recommendation to support doing this is through having dedicated staff for outreach and relationship building and listening to understand community needs, which would also support the Long Island Sound Study in being in step with community needs. One additional position that could be hired for is an extension professional to cover New York City. There's currently extension professionals that cover most of the rest of the sound, but New York would really benefit from an extension professional to build relationships and trust in the Long Island Sound Study and connect folks to the sound in that region. It's also extremely important that communities are engaged in all decision-making that will impact them throughout the entire decision-making process, not just at the end and not just on good things, but from the beginning, communities should be engaged in planning and decision-making processes that will impact them. And the Long Island Sound Study should ensure in its programs that communities are brought in early and often. Next slide, please. So as far as recommendations for supporting meeting community-based organizations' identified needs, I shared earlier that many community-based groups are overextended, and the Long Island Sound Study could work to develop programs specifically for different community groups that are in line with their strategic priorities and that don't require them to do any additional work. This could look like partnering with a local health department to offer a walk with a doctor program where participants could access healthcare while also learning about having the opportunity to spend time on the sound. And additionally, as you heard, additional funding is really needed, and reimbursement funding is untenable for many groups. So the Long Island Sound Study and partners should explore ways to take risks when it comes to funding and supporting frontline community-based organizations. Next slide, please. So before we move on to discussing what comes next, we want to highlight some of these major themes of the assessment as a whole. The major themes of the conversations that we had included access to waterways and safety concerns, access to information and recreational opportunities, flooding and erosion, a disconnect from the environment, water and air quality concerns and infrastructure, as well as systemic concerns. So thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to pass it to Jimena and the Long Island Sound Study team to share what is next.
Thank you so much, Maddie and Amanda. That was great. So before we, move on to questions, I just wanted to briefly talk about general next steps. Of course, this is a needs assessment. The purpose of needs assessments is to figure stuff out and then do something about it. So the plan moving forward is for, now that we have a better understanding of some of the challenges that, are present in our watershed, we have begun thinking through some of these barriers, some of these challenges, some of these needs, and identifying how, to the extent that we can, how can we address them within our programming. So I mentioned early in the presentation that document, the CCMP, which guides everything we do. And I mentioned that we're going to be revising it this year. So we're, part of the idea is that we're having these results present as we work through that revision to the extent that we can, make sure that this new guiding plan reflects the needs of our communities. But we're also going to be thinking about opportunities, events and resources that we can come up with to help address what we heard. And, I'm happy to say that there are already conversations in the works for programs related to access, related to, walking in the environment and the connections to public health. And as well as programmatic considerations. So like, what can we as a program internally do better? We also heard a lot of things that, were good news for us because we can do something about them. We heard things that we're already working on, and it was about realizing that we need to do a better job at communicating those, that those resources exist. So that was a good thing. But we also heard a lot of challenges that right now we can't do anything about. But, there are other groups and other agencies that might be able to do so. So another next step for us is just going to be sharing the results And as Amanda mentioned, in the next couple of weeks, we'll have a report that's way more extensive with a lot of information. And, we'll probably be working on ways to maybe make that information more digestible for folks. So that's another next step, just sharing this information so that it can be used. And finally, and most importantly, probably, or one of the most important pieces of this, to continue the conversations, right? So we've met a lot of really great groups, a lot of really great people, and just continuing to kind of be there for them and talk and and work on collaborations and partnerships and all of those good things. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. And if anyone has any questions or any comments, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat or come off mute. Probably best to raise your hand if you can, and we'll call you. Okay, I see Suri. Would you like to come off mute?
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for sharing this information which I find very valuable. Outside of this group, are you planning of doing sharing the results of the assessment need? I know that you're going to publish a report, but specifically maybe sharing it with like the different communities that are along the that were consulted for this study.
Yeah, so definitely so Amanda and Maddie won't be here for that, but yeah, we will be available to do that if if communities want us to go in person or virtually. We also invited all of those people, all of those communities to this one and to a previous meeting we had for these results. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
I see in the chat, how can we access the recording of this presentation? I will be sending it to everyone who registered, and I'm not sure yet where it's going to be housed, but it's going to be somewhere either on our website or on our YouTube page. But if you registered for this meeting, you will receive it. Katie, go ahead.
Hi, so I work at the Maritime Aquarium, so the Long Island Sound Study is incredibly dear to my heart. So thank you for sharing all this. I was particularly interested in your comments around your findings around subsistence fishing. Is there data around the specific communities where that is especially highlighted? I know at the aquarium we're trying to think about ways to engage the community outside of our own walls, and that seems like an area that potentially we could have an impact in.
I think I'll let Amanda or Maddie answer that one. Do you guys recall if there's specific communities?
So we do have some qualitative findings that hint at some communities where there is subsistence fishing going on, and all of that's going to be included in the report as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, anything? I'm just reading Maddie's comment in the chat. Follow-up is also happening with different community groups who supported organizing listening sessions, having meetings to report back more community-specific results in those areas as well. All right. Any final questions or thoughts or anything?
Similar to Julie Moore, I would like to express gratitude for everyone who took time out to speak to us and share their thoughts and co-create this survey as well as participate in the survey with
Thank you, Kate. Absolutely. I echo that. Sally, go ahead.
Yeah, if you guys received comments from folks outside of the Long Island Sound, would you be willing to share your findings? Will that be in the report?
I think, is it, do you remember, Amanda? I think so.
Yeah, we have some. We have some that were a little further inland. For example, one of our community listening session was with folks from Medford and Brookhaven, which is a little bit further inland. So, and we did get some feedback from people indicating that some of the issues we were talking about on the sound were impacting communities that were further inland as well. So we do have some mention of that as well.
Thank you.
And Sally, I remember that when we met with folks on Long Island, like there were some groups that would kind of invite other people, and I remember at least one conversation that included, like someone from the South Shore. I feel like the South Shore and other kind of inland issues came up more than once, so yeah.
Thank you.
Any other final questions? Okay, if not, I'll give you back your 3 minutes of the night. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here with us today. And yeah, thank you to the team for, it's been lovely working with you all this all year. And like Kate said, thank you to everybody who spoke with us and who worked with us to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.